um, I'm going to conclude my little discussion on the process of someone becoming a saint. We call it canonization. Before I do that, though, I do want to thank everyone who made a donation to the Annunciation Radio Share-a-thon. I was on the radio yesterday afternoon from 5 and ended up being there till 6. And they're still going on today. So if you haven't gotten a chance to help support Catholic radio in the Diocese of Toledo, you can give them a call. You can go online. There's also their app if you have that on your phone. So we want to make sure they are only funded by donations from people. So we want to make sure that Catholic voice on the airwaves, on the radio airwaves, continues. So my little plug for Annunciation Radio this morning. Also, too, a reminder that our normal schedule coming up this weekend. On Saturday afternoon from 3 to 4:15, there's confessions at St. John the Baptist, and then there's Mass at 4:30 p.m. on Saturday. And then remember to turn your clocks back an hour Saturday night into Sunday morning. And then Sunday morning, there's confessions at 8 a.m. At St. Michael's, and then till 8:30, and then 8:45 there's Mass at St. Michael's, and then there's 10:30 Mass here at St. John the Baptist. And this weekend, we'll be celebrating the Solemnity of All Saints, because that falls on November 1st. So Saturday evening Mass and Sunday morning Masses will be for All Saints Day. And then on Monday, there won't be a 7 a.m. Mass. There's an evening Mass on Monday for commemoration of all the faithful departed, All Souls Day. So give some more people a chance to participate. There'll be a 7 p.m. Mass on Monday, November 2nd. And so we've been talking about this process that by which holy people are declared saints in the church. And yesterday we talked about kind of the history, how it was first acclamation of the martyrs, those who gave their life for the faith in the early church when it was under persecution. And then once the Edict of Toleration in 313 AD, things started to be, there's people started to be recognized just for the sanctity of their life, because we saw less and less martyrdoms taking place once the church is no longer illegal to be Christian. And those are usually called confessors, although for women too, the widows and virgins many times were also the titles that were given to those saints who had holy lives but did not die for the faith. But as we know in our current time, there still is persecution of those, and people still get martyred. So that is one of the process, or that's one of the acts that leads to someone being investigated for being declared a saint. And some of this. That's more of the language that we'll start to use here as this becomes a more standardized process, because it used to be a local process. Usually someone who was holy, the people in that area, and the bishop would actually kind of look into the holiness of life and they would start to venerate this person until eventually it could spread to the entire church. A formal process that really has its final decision in Rome starts about the 11th century. So it seems that the first one was Pope Urban II, investigated the cause of Nicholas of Trani. He asked the bishop there to conduct a local investigation into his sanctity and miracles, which then would be submitted to the Pope for judgment. This first cause for canonization dragged on over several pontificates, and it doesn't seem that Nicholas of Trani was ever declared a saint. And as that drags on over these pontificates, there seems to be kind of a system, a procedure that starts to develop. Pope Callistus II, from 1119 to 1124, required all causes to include a critical biography of the person being proposed. And as often happens in the church, abuses brought about major developments in church practice. It's in 1170 that Pope Alexander III decreed that no one could be declared a saint without the permission of the Supreme Pontiff. We still have this letter that he wrote to the King of Sweden. It seems that the people of Sweden were hailing this person and venerating him as a martyr, but he was killed when he was drunk. And so Pope Alexander III said, wait a second. No, the reason they were hailing him as a martyr and as a saint was because, I guess, around his tomb, miracles were happening. And so we start to get this kind of twofold investigation that goes into, first, the sanctity of the person's life while they lived, the acts that they did, and then after they die, that there's proof that they can intercede before God for us through miracles happening. So martyrs were always kind of a slightly different case because they made that ultimate witness. But I think one of the popes talked about somebody could do their acts just for people to be seen. They don't have, it's not that they're doing holy things, and miracles can happen even if it's not just because of the intercession of this person. So that's why we get kind of this two-pronged evidence that is being looked for. And so the church, especially, and as time went on, it became a very complicated process, and the number of miracles that were needed increased too. I think from the Code of Canon Law, which regulates everything in the church, this is kind of the church's legal framework, gives the Pope the ability to set procedures for this. And so throughout history, obviously, popes have provided different sets of guidelines for this, or have amended what guidelines they inherit. And we'll talk about that for our modern age in just a minute. But I think it was from the 1917 code that it was 2 miracles were needed before someone could be declared blessed, beatified. That was the first step. And then after that had happened, and we'll talk about kind of the difference between those two things, and then there were 2 more miracles that were needed for them to be canonized, to be declared a saint. And also too, that it depended about how easily these were verified, whether they held weight or not. And so it got to the point where I think it was necessary, or it could have become necessary for like 6 miracles to be declared before, or to have investigated and declared that they happened before someone could be declared a saint. So in our more modern times, under Pope Paul VI in 1969 and under Pope John Paul II in 1983, they made some revisions and refinements to this. So Pope Paul consolidated the process into a single cause for canonization. So he kind of combined the two. Now there still is those 2 steps, beatification and canonization, and the number of miracles has been reduced to just 1 in each case. And also too, since the Pope has the power over all kinds of everything in the church, that way he can dispense with that if necessary, if he deems it necessary or the investigation shows it. So the other thing that John Paul II did was he eliminated what was called the role of the devil's advocate. So it used to be almost like the canonization process was like a little trial. They put this, this deceased person who everybody or a certain group of people were acclaiming should be considered a saint. There was like a trial that was held. So you had people who were arguing for this process, and then the devil's advocate who was arguing against it. The removal of the devil's advocate doesn't mean that there's still not a promoter of the faith, but it's that role's slightly different, and they do thoroughly investigate everything to make sure that the person's sanctity of life and that miracles have occurred under their intercession. And so the other thing that has happened recently too is kind of a reduction in the amount of time before someone can be considered for canonization. Before, I think, John Paul II's reforms, it says that a cause had to wait 50 years before it could be introduced. Part of that was to guard against what they call fanaticism. So, to allow mere human enthusiasm to cool down a little bit, to be able to take a step back and become a more stable and enduring, fame of holiness, not just something that's a gut reaction right off the time. But what they found was it made it harder to investigate the person because eyewitnesses were all deceased, many times were deceased at that point. And so it seemed to complicate the process a little bit more. And I know, I think one of the things that John Paul II was even said that, he declared or canonized a lot of saints during his pontificate, and some of that was because he wanted us to have these examples to look to, and especially kind of more modern examples to look to. So that process changed a little bit. One of the at one time the prefect for the congregation, I think, described it in a good way, that the process, it is a meticulous one, and everything is investigated very, very deeply and completely. But he said it tries to take into account three voices that must be in agreement about this person's holiness of life. So the voice of the people, so that people recognize the sanctity of this person. They say the voice of God, and that's usually through a miracle that's attributed to this person's intercession. And then the voice of the church, who looks at all of this and then makes this official judgment. So when the voice of the people, the voice of God, and the voice of the church all come together in agreement, then someone is declared first a blessed. That's the beatification process. And really what that allows is then for kind of local veneration of this person as a saint. It's not opened up to the entire church, but the area around that. A good example would be Blessed Solanus Casey. There's the ability here in our area, the United States, to venerate him, but it hasn't been expanded to the entire universal church as at this time. So even like a Blessed Carlo Acutis, who is recently the young man from Italy. His, as we call it, the cult of the saint. Sometimes it has a kind of a strange connotation in our modern times, but kind of that veneration for him and his celebration at Mass and everything like that's going to be localized to Italy or Europe, areas, the area where he lived until God willing, he's declared a saint, and then that could spread to the entire church. One Saint Kateri Tekakwitha would be an example for us, or Saint Saint Faustina Kowalska, which is a blessed. It would have been more localized during that time, and then once they're declared a saint. That second miracle, all the investigation happens, and they're canonized as a saint. Then they're added into the liturgical calendar, and all of that becomes then a celebration for the entire church. So that's just kind of a quick run through in these last couple days of the process. It's very complicated, but that's okay. It's still recognizing the holiness and the sanctity of people, and there are still saints, obviously, coming from our modern times, and that's the goal of all of us, really, as we get ready to prepare to celebrate All Saints. It's a reminder that saints are spending eternity with God, and so at the end of our earthly journey, isn't that what we want? So we're all called to strive to be saints and to ask them to pray for us, and we can use them as inspiration for us to pursue holiness of life. So hope everyone has a great weekend. Happy Halloween and happy All Saints Day. And we'll continue to look out for one another and pray for one another and pursue holiness together. And I pray that God will bless you abundantly this day.